Take a selfie. Take a selfie. Huh? Take a selfie with us.
Okay, okay, guys, let's get started, right? So, hello and welcome to today's research discussions. I'm super happy to see a full room. So, last week I said that I want to have this the whole semester like that. Thank you for doing that, right? And keeping up so well. And yeah, today we will talk about ChatGPT. So, I think you are all probably quite familiar with it. I mean, probably everybody by now has typed in a question to ChatGPT asking him, I don't know, where to get the best ice cream or something like that. But I guess today we want to look at it from more of a scientific perspective. So we had 3 people who volunteered for this job to guide us through these discussions. So guys, I want to hear comments from you. I'm happy to bring you the microphones and all the time. So feel free to interrupt. So the stars of today morning, they are Jaideep. He's an experimentalist. Probably you are well familiar with him. And we have 2 theory specialists, Kyle and Pablo, who will guide us through the discussions. And yeah, let's get started, right?
Thank you. Thank you. Here you go. And you need a mic.
You need this.
Okay. So this is for that thing, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So my name is Jaideep. I faculty here. I have a teaching role, so I teach students, but I also run a research group. The scope of this is just limited to research. There are sort of other interesting questions about how you might use it in a class. But this is for sort of in a research context. This is a research discussion. I'm going to put my cards on the table. I'm a fundamentalist, extremist, anti-ChatGPT person. If I was the president, I would immediately start a nuclear war. The entire world would end, and it would be okay because ChatGPT would go down with it. So I just want you to know that's where I'm starting from. Now, it would be totally unfair to have this conversation if I was the person doing the whole discussion. We're a university campus. There's intellectual freedom here. We have to be able to have open and honest conversations and debates about this stuff. And so I asked Pablo and Kyle if they could represent slightly more nuance that you're going to get from me. Okay. And this is meant to be interactive. It's a little bit of an experiment. There's a feature called Poll Everywhere. It's a website. There are going to be QR codes that you can use on your phone, and then you can respond to poll questions. It's totally anonymous, but it's a way to make this interactive and kind of gauge the temperature in this room. I will tell you, I've had a lot of informal conversations, and there is a generational gradient in perceptions about the use of generative AI. Okay. And things that are obvious to you, I assure you, are not obvious to the person sitting next to you, okay? And we want to reveal some of that stuff with these polls. Here you go, Pablo.
Excellent. I guess just to put the cards on the table, that is a good idea. I'm Pablo. I am an academic specialist here, and I do research and also help on education and students and everything that I can. And my view is completely opposite to Jaideep. I acknowledge the problems and the pitfalls and the warnings that we should have about these things, but I believe that it's one of the best things that we have done as humanity. And that if we all die due to the nuclear war, but this thing survives and is able to propagate what we as a civilization have been able to do in the last 10,000, 20,000 years, I will be happy. I see this as our virtual children. So I will be defending its use for many things, including research. And Kyle?
Oh, well, I guess I'm somewhere in between. The one time I'll be a centrist is on this particular topic, because there's a lot of gray area, and I think we're going to see that throughout the presentation. So we can go ahead and kick things off.
Excellent. This is the outline. So we're going to start with, before we give you many thoughts and things and information, we're going to start with what comes to mind, and that will be the first experiment of this poll feature. Then we're going to talk a bit about how it works. We're going to talk about the current guidelines that are available from some institutions. Then we're going to analyze some case studies, and we have the discomfort or comfort bar. It will be very easy for you. Just click the face, depending on how you feel about the case study that we present. And then we're going to go forward with open discussions and thinking on how to move forward. So the first task that you as an audience have now is to get your phones. I want to see as many phones as possible out there pointing at me. You can take a picture of me, too, or the 3 of us. But there is a QR code. I have no idea if this is going to work or not. We're going to see it. But if you open that QR code, it will send you to a poll that should be active. I really hope that I click the active button. And I'm going to now switch to the tab so that we can see unmuted. Really? Are we muted? Okay. We're not muted. Some people, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to assume yes. If not, please complain. Okay. Let me open this thingy. It's okay. Okay, cool beans. So,
I'm going to point out the irony that we can barely get Zoom to work.
Yeah. So these are the things that are appearing there. This is a.
Put a strawberry. I like that.
Yeah. I saw my name.
Yeah, this is not a trick presentation. You guys are all three real, right?
We are real. I read programming, powerful task, race, incorrect poems, making recipes, tool, posters, funny, writing, hallucinations.
You missed plagiarism.
Well, yeah, you can put it in there. Google. Very interesting. 1984. Big, abuse, art, multiple, search, text, contest, Skynet, Terminator, format, useful, learning, research, funny, better, Pablo, again, code. Okay, so, this already gives some sort of temperature of the room of what we're having in here. Very well, let me go back to our presentations. Thank you all for sharing that. And we're going to talk a bit about, well, before we talk about how it works, these are the loose objectives for today. Become aware the tool exists and some of the current guidelines. Become aware of how different people have perception about the tool and its uses, and have an initial discussion or initial push to discuss the involvement of this in research, especially within each research group, which is something that Jaideep has already done, and I think is a very good idea. Finally, we're going to have a space for continuing these discussions virtually after this presentation is done, and all the links will be shared. Okay, so now I stop monologuing. Kyle, here you go.
For a very, very, very brief introduction of how generative AI works, specifically with regards to large language models, because I think we have the impression sometimes when you go to the magic chatbot and you ask questions and it just knows everything and it thinks things through so methodically. How does it do that? Well, it's not magic. First, to get rid of that that assumption, it's actually just based on some math, like most of the things we do. And in particular, it's the math of deep learning. So it's all, if you know anything about machine learning, you might know about regression tasks, classification tasks, etc. If you want the full gory details, check out this link, which is where I stole all these slides, speaking of plagiarism. And you can get some more in-depth discussion on it. But at a very high level, essentially, given some text, most of these models are just trying to predict what's going to come next. So there's some probability associated with what word it wants to pull out of its hat. So in the case that we have here, the cat likes to sleep in the blank. Very low probability for the cat likes to sleep in the ability. That's probably pretty good. It doesn't make much sense to us. But decent probability that the cat wants to sleep in the bag or the box. Well, the reason it knows that is because it has read, it has seen a lot of text, and just throughout that entire data set, those things are what follows this type of phrase most often. So it's quite sophisticated, and it's doing very cool things about embedding these words and these high dimensional spaces down into some low dimensional representation. But at the end of the day, it's still just a classification task, and it's just based on the probability of what word should come next. So that's sort of the nuts and bolts of what these large language models are doing. But the step to actually produce something like a ChatGPT isn't just to have a word generator. You want to have some interactivity. So we have the pre-training step, which is where you just feed it all of these books that you probably don't have the copyright to. That's one of those ethical concerns that you should be considering, but kind of out of our pay grade, I'd say. And then there's some fine-tuning steps, because a lot of these chatbots are kind of tailored towards one specific thing. You feed it a lot of text just from every different source and everything is weighted equally, you're going to get a lot of nonsense most likely, and you're going to get languages probably intermingling and such. So oftentimes there is this fine-tuning step that the companies do. So these for-profit companies do this fine-tuning to help alignment. So to help their chatbot produce things that they would agree with as a corporation. So think about those words and how they make you feel. Now, yeah, that's good, that's good. And then 3, there's reinforcement learning. So this is basically to get the prompt and response in as natural a way as possible. Is they pay people, they don't pay them very much, and maybe they're not paying people fairly. That's another ethical concern that one should consider. But essentially, they have a ton of prompts, and then they have a lot of different responses that this thing can give, and then they select which one they think is the most natural. So it's not all magic AI goodness. There's still a lot of human blood, sweat, and tears behind it. And depending on who you're paying, depending on what instructions you give them, that's going to bias these results. So you see that there's clear possibility for bias. It's inherently built into the training process, in fact. So that's another thing to consider whenever you're using one of these tools for one purpose or another, is that you should probably think about where the information is coming from. So that's a very high-level overview. And now we're going to get into chatbots exist. They've done all that hard work. They've spent billions of dollars and billions of terawatt hours of energy. Now what? What are the institutions telling us?
Okay, so so this is so one thing we should point out is that there are there's an open question about what it should be used, how it should be used, context, all that stuff. But this is not happening in a vacuum. We have responsibilities as professionals, as scientists, as employees, to actually follow the guidelines that have been set out already. Okay. Now, they're not that many. And so there are things like the MSU has a website, January 26, 2024. It's called Interim Guidance. The whole thing is there, but if you read it, they basically say, you should know the rules. Now, there are some obvious things, like you can't take export control technology, say the manuals for our laser, scan it, copy it, put it into ChatGPT, and ask it to give you a summary of how to align the laser. I'm embarrassed I have to say that out loud for the students in my group, but you actually aren't allowed to do that. That's an export control thing, okay? Now, the APS journals, this line and the link is actually 50% of what's on the website, okay? It's 4 sentences, okay? And we'll talk about that in a second. Elsevier also has some guidelines. NSF has some guidelines for both writing proposals and reviewing proposals. And then the DOE has a general reference guide for how their employees could potentially use it and their recommendations for best practices. Just trying to point out the dates. Okay, this is a moving target. So at the very least, you do have an obligation if you're writing papers, doing research, applying for grant funding, reviewing grants, working at the university as an employee of Michigan State University. You do actually have to be aware of these things, and you got to follow these things. Okay, I'm not going to tell you what they are. Instead, we're going to do a quiz. Here's a QR code. Here's your first question.
Wait.
Oh, sorry.
I need to.
Oh, you got to do the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to do the thing. Here's the thing. No. Ask me later. Oh wait. So, question 1. Okay, now it should be open.
Okay. Okay. So question 1. You ask a generative AI platform to take your class roster along with their current course scores, and then assign students into groups of 3 based on their strengths and weaknesses. As an instructor, this is the kind of thing sometimes I do because I'd like to mix and match students so they can help each other. It's extremely time consuming and a nuanced process. But if I could just ask ChatGPT to do it, that'd be awesome. It would save me so much time. Okay, so here's the QR code. And I think the options are on the thing.
And these are the results. Maybe we don't show the results until then.
Okay, so maybe That's fine. We could do it. Okay,
Right.
so the options are you're allowed to do this, you're discouraged from doing this, but you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this. So actually, this is super clear. This is a violation of FERPA laws, FERPA rules. If you're an instructor, you have this training, you know the answer. If you're a TA, you did this training the first day you started graduate school, and you've not thought about it since, and you've forgotten. And if you're a student, you have no idea what I'm talking about. So there is a right answer, and it's you are not allowed to do this. Okay, you are reviewing information about your students. If a student's parents call you and ask them about their grades, you cannot have that conversation. That's how FERPA rules work. You sure as hell can't put into ChatGPT. Okay. Is the next one?
Yep.
Okay. You submit a paper to an APS journal which contains text directly copy and pasted from a generative AI platform. And there's some options for this as well.
And the same options. You can, you should not, but you can, you shouldn't.
Actually, it's super nuanced. I wrote
Oh my
very,
goodness, I'm sorry.
I wrote very careful things because it's actually the policy is not.
Okay, I copy pasted that. So can you give them the options because this is what I. Oh, I'm very sorry.
No. Each one was different. I set it up very carefully. Okay. Yeah.
Is there a way that I can go to yours?
Yeah. If you go to this thing, and go to account activities, and then you go to me, and then you go to question 2.
Okay.
And then you can activate that maybe.
Yes, we're going to get it. That's okay. That's okay.
But then you got to go to my
yeah,
QR code.
Yeah.
All right.
So?
It seems there's a maximum number of responses allowed.
Yeah, I'm delighted we hit that. I wasn't going to pay for this because, I kind of don't care what you think, but but the free version is limited to 40 responses. Yeah.
Per question. Right? Per question, not per.
40 responses per question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we should be able to be here.
Oh, okay, yeah, this is the thing. Yeah, and the QR code is up there. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. They got it. Okay.
Can you see the whole answer on your phone? Yes. Okay. By the way, this is I want to be upfront. Until we did this exercise, I actually didn't look to see if there were guidelines. I didn't know what they were. I couldn't have guessed ahead of time what they were. I only wrote this question after I read it in preparation for today. And then I wrote this question. Okay, so the answer is not obvious. Okay. So there's 4 sentences on the APS Journal's website, so you can read it yourself at your convenience. Okay. The correct answer is this one. You're allowed to do this. You should disclose it to the editor. You're encouraged to disclose it in the paper. That's the answer. Right now. Yes, Oscar.
Right in the very beginning, in the list of authors, you say Jaideep and ChatGPT.
No. One of the sentences on the APS guidelines is ChatGPT is not an author. They have no accountability whatsoever. You absolutely cannot list them as an author. That's actually one of the 4 sentences, amazingly.
More accountability than ChatGPT.
Okay. So I'm going to put this one in here for the third one, and let me open the thingy. I'm becoming an expert on this thing. Okay, there you go. First 40 can actually answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
QR code's at the upper right.
I put it there.
Okay, so you submit a grant proposal to NSF which contains text directly and copied and pasted from a generative AI platform. Sort of the same question, you're just now sending it to a different place.
Can I ask a clarification question?
Yeah.
So what does it mean, like, would you like ask ChatGPT, oh, please, can you give me an outline for my, I don't know, for the introduction? Or I don't know, if you, let's say not a native English speaker, you wrote a text which contains, I don't know, some not so nicely developed words, and then you ask it, please rewrite maybe with some nicer, more scientific words.
That depends on the journal and context. So you have to be responsible and know the answer. If you're asking me what's the answer for APS journals, one of their 4 sentences is they describe with not much nuance and not much guidance. If you use ChatGPT or generative AI to polish your writing and things like that, you don't need to disclose it and it's okay. That's one of the 4 sentences.
Case study exactly about that.
Okay, so here is the question about grant proposal. Okay, so the 4 options are: you're not allowed to do this, you're allowed to do this, you do not need to disclose at all, you're allowed to do this, you're encouraged to disclose the use of generative AI in the project description, you're allowed to do this, you must disclose. The official guidance from the NSF website is you're allowed to do this, you're encouraged to disclose in the project description. NSF is saying right now, we're just collecting information, we're trying to figure it out, we don't know what the right answer is. You're allowed to use it for grant proposal preparation, and if you feel like it, you can disclose it. Let me just say something. If you use it and you have an issue with disclosing your use of it, that's your conscience telling you you're doing something wrong. Go ahead, Betty.
Yeah, so I think there's a distinction. The distinction of cut and paste, copy and paste, or whatever you said it, and the distinction of polishing. I think to me, there is a difference. Cut and paste, I don't think it should be allowed.
Well, no, hold on. Let me actually. Yeah. So you're saying there's a nuance between polishing and cut and paste, right? Yeah. No, I'm just telling you the policy from the NSF website. You can use it. They don't say what use means. Okay. For the preparation of a proposal, they don't say what use means. They don't say you have to disclose it. They just say that you're encouraged to describe how you used it in the proposal preparation. You personally might feel that there's a difference between polishing and copying and pasting. NSF currently doesn't care.
Make the entire thing like that, and maybe don't disclose it, and the policy doesn't penalize it.
Actually, I don't know. I don't know the answer.
So there are tools that can detect the use of these large language models, in particular because they don't really talk like if you have a representative sample size of proposals, LLM's not going to write the same way. So it looks and it can have some statistical sort of significance that it was prepared by a ChatGPT or something.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I guess, do any of these guidelines offer any clarity on enforcement mechanisms or any way to resolve ambiguities or direct contradictions between guidelines from various sources?
Great question.
Absolutely not. We live in a consequence-free world right now. The guidelines were probably written in ChatGPT because people are too stupid to think about it themselves. So no.
I just wanted to add something to the thing. Somebody asked that are there tools that can detect AI? I actually did a test. I wrote something myself, put it into the test tool, and it said 0% AI usage. I took out something from ChatGPT on the same topic. It said 100% ChatGPT, and then I edited it just to see how well are these detection tools. They can actually detect if you've done like 50% of your work and 50% of AI. So the thing is that these tools are not 100% reliable. So that's why there's not any clear enforcement or like policies like that, because there's not exactly a tool that can say with 100% correctness if it was written by ChatGPT or a human. That's the thing. Thank you.
Here it is.
Just a comment on the detection of LLM in a bit of an arms race, as the people who make the detect try to make their detectors better, as people who make LLMs try to make them harder.
Yeah.
And this is an unfortunate, and so they sort of evolve to. So we'll see what happens in the long term.
So what's the problem?
Oh, further right. Okay. So what's the problem with using generative AI in these in the cases of like writing a paper or putting a proposal together? What's wrong with the copy paste? Like, why not?
What I suggest, let's move to the case studies, because these are the guidelines, and then we can all discuss, once we have presented that, we can discuss the ethics or the implications of the next one. So I'm going to switch to the case studies, and then we have time for more. Yeah, I did.
Pablo, before you switch to case studies, is it okay if I just make a comment?
Of course, Philomena, we hear you.
So the restrictions come in reviewing. So in the grants, you can copy paste stuff and disclose if you like, but when you're reviewing grants, then that's another. So NSF and DOE have made a different choice for reviewing and work in panels of grants.
Yeah, so I would encourage you to go to the, okay, I don't encourage you. If you work in the field and you're doing research, it is your job to know these things. So go to the website and read them. Now, if you're confused and angry because of how little guidance there is and you can disagree with the policy, that's a separate issue. But yeah, I just wanted to give 3 illustrative examples. Yeah, you should.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to make a couple of comments with respect to viewpoints, and I couldn't resist putting out these short. So that illustrates part of my point. My second part of my point are these 2 cartoon illustrations from the last century and a half about progress. The left one is, from what I understood, candle companies were freaking out with the invention of the light bulb because they were going to run out of business. So they started running this type of campaigns on what will happen if we continue to progress in the direction in where we have electric cables and all of that. And these were the type of fears at the moment. So if you only see the cartoon on the left, you will be like, screw warnings, let's just go for progress, and people that are afraid don't matter. And the one on the right is 1954 NAT about putting lead on gasoline and how cool it makes your engine go and how this is a progress and look how smooth. And that one was we shouldn't have done. So a comparison to today, I have the cartoon illustration on the left on some of the concerns about ChatGPT and these type of tools and how they can eliminate critical thinking. And on the right, I have me, usually excited about these things and sharing how cool many of these things are. So the important point is we need to discuss it and you need to form your own opinion and just align with whatever cartoon appears here. Okay, we're ready for the case studies. So the first case study that we're going to take a look is me. For an oncoming presentation, Pablo prompts paid ChatGPT to generate cartoon-style illustrations to help explain complex concepts. This is my prompt, and this is a discussion that I had with ChatGPT. At the moment, I wanted to have a bunch of goats that were kind of the same goat, but with different suits, and one color goat that was different. And for me, that was important to illustrate one of the papers that we were working on in a presentation, trying to explain how to distinguish between copies of models and new models for combining forecasts. And I was explaining that with graphs, and whenever I explained it in this way, people immediately understood what I was talking about. And I talk about the dimensionality reduction as identifying the principal components on the variations of these copied codes. So now, given that, I don't want you to, the idea of this poll is not to judge whether or not we should explain things with cartoons. That's my style, respect my style. But how do you feel about the fact that I went to ChatGPT and asked for that to happen? Yes, this is the old QR code.
Or old QR code.
Yep, all of them should be the old QR code if I didn't screw up. So how do you feel about it?
I don't feel a need to respond.
Yeah, yeah. There's a good. Yeah. Okay. There is no correct answer in this one. It's more like to show to the room how we all feel different. Let me put another case study. Case study 2, reading papers. For an upcoming journal club, first-year grad student Maria prompts paid ChatGPT to read the assigned paper and help in understanding. Now, the paper is the reduced order scattering emulator paper that I wrote. I did this so I can check if ChatGPT is making sense. She prompted, could you read this paper and give me an intuitive summary of what they are doing? I'm very confused. And this is a summary. The summary is excellent. I read it, on point. I think it could have, I explained it almost as well as I could have. Then Maria asked, I really don't understand equation A1 in the appendix. Could you explain the terms in it? What is the character next to the S inside the F and G? So I made this scenario in which case she doesn't even know the label of the character. And ChatGPT is able to read that, recognize that that is theta, recognize that that is a Sommerfeld parameter, and explain it actually very good. And it goes over all the steps of what that equation means, and it gives an intuitive explanation in terms of what is happening with the particle and the potential. So Maria then goes and shares what she has learned on the journal club. How do you feel about it? No, this is a conversation.
I just, while you're thinking about this, just note that that's copyrighted information that you stole and put into ChatGPT without compensation to the authors, which matters, without compensation to the journals. No one cares about them.
So, case 32.
We have a question.
Okay, so
please.
I guess this is. Say I am at my house and I want to like look behind a paywall of PhysRevC. Can I just ask for a paper and it'll like spit it out? Not that I know morally wrong, but let's just say I don't want to run to FREB and do the paper.
There's a way you can remote in access.
Okay.
You don't have to do that, but I don't think it gives you papers back.
Okay. I knew it used to give New York Times articles and that was nice, but not that I would do it.
They would just print out the paper. Not that I've tried it. We're running out of time, so I'm not going to do the next of this where Maria asks it to write code and things go terribly wrong. So instead, I'm going to go to the next case study. But before that, I want all of you to consider what will happen in this exact situation that I described. We changed ChatGPT to a senior grad student that sat down with Maria and explained all of the concepts from the paper. How will things change?
But it would be different if Maria read the paper first and then asked questions to clarify them, not to have an abbreviation of the paper in the paper.
I don't think, I don't resonate with the order mattering, but I definitely resonate with if she doesn't read the paper afterwards. That is definitely a problem. Okay, we go to the next case study because we're running out of time. Aha, Jaideep, this is yours. Here it is.
Well, we're running out of time. I want to get to like my favorite part of this. I'm not going to talk about these things. We're going to share the slides so you can look at it at your leisure. But let me go to the next one. By the way, I will say, in Pablo's examples, he used a paid version. If you can't pay for the paid version, you're at a disadvantage. Okay. So there's an equity issue. Okay, so Mark gave a really interesting seminar on, yeah, you have to pay access to get garbage, who cares? All right, you're just throwing it money. So Mark gave a really awesome seminar last week on intruder states, something I didn't know anything about. So I was like, well, let me go to Wikipedia and learn more about it. Wikipedia gave this is all it is. It's talking about theoretical chemistry, nothing about nuclear physics. And I was like, I don't think this is it. I was like, okay, so I'm now frustrated. I got to use another tool. So I go to ChatGPT, and actually the entire transcript of my conversation with ChatGPT is on the backup slides. You can read it for yourself, okay? But I asked, in a nuclear structure context, what is an intruder state? Keep in mind, I actually don't know what that means. I read it, and I was like, oh, different major shell configuration, low energy appearance, mixing with normal states, shape coexistence. I remember hearing those words during Mark's talk, and I was like, okay, well, all right, okay, that sounds reasonable to me. Again, I'm not an expert, so I have no idea. So then I was like, okay, I got to dig a little bit deeper. I should read some papers because, I'm an honest, hardworking, generous, loving human being. I'm not saying some of you aren't. So let me request some standard references to dig deeper. Can you provide a citation for the information? The explanation provided is a synthesis of well-established concepts in nuclear physics. I read that as kind of a big FU, all right? And so there's 3 references given. Bohr and Molteson, volume 2. I actually have the book. I didn't read it, but I looked at the index. Intruder state, island of inversion, shape cone's existence are not in the index. Okay. Hyde and Wood, highly cited Review of Modern Physics paper actually exists. And it talks about this all the time. Broglia, Boardington, this is a book, Nuclear Structure Theory and Applications. They are frequent collaborators. Broglia died recently, so I actually looked at his entire CV. They published over 100 joint publications. This book doesn't exist. Okay. So then I said, can you provide me with 5 references on unexpected results involving intruder states? Because that was sort of the interesting thing about Mark's talk. It gave 5 references. This is a real review article. This is a real review article. This is a real review article. This is a Physics Today article written by Alexandra Gada. I don't know if you know this. She actually works at the lab. I emailed her last night. I was like, hey, I'm really interested about intruder states. Could you send me this Physics Today article? For some reason, I find it challenging to actually find your article on the internet. And she replied, and I have permission from her. This is a direct quote. The entire email said this: does not exist, totally fake. Okay. And then there's this paper. This is a real PRC publication. The citation is wrong. This is not the title. I am still learning about intruder states. I read the whole paper. It's like 4 pages. This summary is incorrect with the little knowledge I have currently with intruder states. So the information you may or may not get is correct. ChatGPT cannot tell you exactly where the information is coming from. When pressed, you may or may not get real, relevant, or actually accurately represented citations. Actually, just so you know, I'm actually not worried about any of that stuff. If you read garbage from the internet, which is to 0th order a cesspool of racist and sexist garbage, and then you write papers based on that, the same consequences for that is if you get it from ChatGPT. So actually, that doesn't matter. My issue is the following. As scientists, we need to have intellectual honesty and do reproducible research that involves giving proper credit where it's due. And you need to provide a paper trail showing how your original contribution was developed and how it fits into the big picture. As far as I know, even if ChatGPT gave you 100% accurate responses, ChatGPT cannot be cited in a reproducible way unless you save the chat transcript. No human can be held accountable. And the paper trail that ChatGPT responses based on simply doesn't exist. Okay, that's one of my infinite number of reasons I'm angry and annoyed all the time.
We have some comments.
Comments.
Thank you. Okay, so clearly Jaideep's not a fan, and Pablo is. I've gotten that. And Jaideep seems to know the pitfalls of ChatGPT, and Pablo seems to know where it's useful. Is there like a map you could draw or some sort of like visual things like please use heat, like this is where it works and this is where it doesn't? Because like at the end of the day, I will probably end up using generative AI models, and it'd be nice to know, hey, this doesn't work, and hey, this does.
I think having instructions will not work.
Okay.
Something that we should have a discussion, and at the end it will be up to you how much you want to risk using it in this and that way.
Oh.
I think the whole point of this discussion here is just to see these thoughts. So
Okay.
Then there are discussions within, say, a research group saying, I don't care, use it however you want, but at least disclose that you used it or put a chat on there. Okay, we're moving to the last case study because it's really important.
We had another question. Is there time for it or I don't know?
Well, this is part of the discussion, so. Okay, then yes.
Okay, I know this.
We're going on real people and then two.
It's a very quick question. So, Jaideep, when we have this problem, is it because you're using the free version or not the paid version?
It'll be in the paid version as well. Yeah.
Well, but do you use the paid version or the free version?
You think I fucking pay for this?
In the paid version, you have access to a citation. But
Right. So I'm actually thinking Africa should actually get the best version, pay for it, and everybody use it, and then we actually can track what everybody is doing with this.
So much about surveillance, huh?
Let me answer your question first. You're gonna get the same like hallucination and just wrong things in any version of a generative AI just because of the way they work. The trend recently is they have access to the internet, so the cited sources are actually given like a link because it read it from a page. I would trust those sources more because they can't make up something and pull from the APS website. The equity issue is there though. If the paid version is better, then they don't have access to it. But that's true for all software. We don't have an overleaf subscription, for instance, so you can only have one collaborator.
Do you think that this jargon didn't exist before ChatGPT? Because as a referee, I've seen people self-citing their paper, even though it has nothing to do with the paper that they're publishing.
Definitely, yeah. Yes, sir. It's always been a problem. It's not unique to ChatGPT. Yes.
It's actually existing before even ChatGPT existed. So,
yeah, it's still a problem.
And I mean, even we are paying for journals, as Jaideep mentioned that, okay, you're going to have this paid version. Okay, we are paying for the journals. They have been retracting the papers now for publishing all the junk that they have done.
So somebody had their hands on Zoom. Anybody wants to read from Zoom?
We have one comment here too.
Let's take the Zoom first. Waiting a while.
Does Grammarly or similar count as generative AI?
That's a great question that we'll get into with the polishing. Oh, the question is, so that's not the question I think was hand raised, but Scott asked, does Grammarly or similar count as generative AI use? And that goes in line with using these generative AI things to polish text and stuff. It is generative AI, but that's probably a use case that people are more on the green side of sentiment rather than the red side.
Yeah, so it seems that when using it's you can't take it blindly. You should verify things but it's still a useful tool. Just because you have to verify doesn't mean it's not useful.
I completely agree, and that's the right answer. But let me tell you why we're having this conversation. In my class, the class policy is you can use ChatGPT for anything. All you need to do is disclose. All of my homeworks for every one of my classes has a reading and writing question. There's a prompt, you're supposed to write something. My students turn in, copy and paste from ChatGPT with no critical analysis, but they also submit the chat transcript, which is required. And because they do what I say they need to do, because I'm still learning on how students use it, they get full credit. Okay? So my impression, unscientific, of how young people use it is that it's pretty uncritical. And there needs to be a conversation, and that's the point of this. I know how I personally feel. I'm not going to impose that on other people. You'll see my research group's policy is, as long as you're adhering to the guidelines that have been given, you can use it for anything and everything. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for it. And in my group, you must disclose the use, and you must save the chat transcript. Okay? So I have a surprisingly nuanced and open-minded view of this. But I'll tell you, I'm not going to use it.
Okay, all right. Case study 3. Yeah, we're going to go briefly through this last case study, which is more specifically related to programming tasks, so coding, which is something that a lot of people use this for, because a lot of times the programming can be purely mechanical. There's a lot of boilerplate that you have to do. Other aspects of programming is quite nuanced and requires some critical thought. So the specific case study that I chose, though, is more focused on homework, because that's a little easier to define. And this is an example from some PDFs that VTech will be familiar with. This is from his class on nuclear models. And if you take the lecture that is on binding energies, and at the end there's an assignment, and you know nothing. You literally just take the PDF, put it into some model. I use Claude in this case because there are many of them. Wanted to have some spread there. And without knowing anything, just taking the output and just running it, how far do you get? I have the actual code here. You can take a look. But you get something that is wrong, but reasonable. And this is dangerous because if you literally know nothing, you just use it and you're just churning out because you have the deadline, you're not going to get full points, and people are going to ask why you didn't even notice that if these are supposed to be comparison of your fitted liquid drop model and binding energies, the liquid drop model isn't that bad. I mean, you can get sort of these bold features. The issue in this case is actually quite subtle. If you at least read your code through once and know that your input file for experimental masses has the proton number, neutron number instead of total A, then boom, suddenly you get something that looks way better. And a lot of people would feel comfortable saying, yeah, that's probably about as good as a liquid drop model. I'm going to just take that and just throw it in because it's reasonable. It's still wrong, though. If you look even more critically and actually look at how the model is defined and all of these things, it makes very subtle mistakes. And it makes these subtle mistakes because, again, it's just predicting the next little bit of text. It doesn't actually know anything about what it's doing. One thing that they're doing these days with the models is actually having the chatbot run the code as it writes it, so it can actually pretty well iterate on when it finds bugs and all of this. So it's getting really good at producing code that will run and give results that, again, look reasonable, that you might expect, but it's still wrong. I think that while we get the right answer, the completely right answer from my answer key for the parameters, we really miss the point of the assignment, which is to learn how to calibrate a model and learn about how these models work. So I don't have a sentiment analysis thing here because this kind of is open-ended. I say that this extreme case, we say, violates the spirit of the assignment to teach somebody how to do something. But this is a sliding gray scale. I think that Andy's looking for a map to tell us how to find our way. I don't know if we can. This is something that is incredibly nuanced because you're not going to restrict people from going to Stack Overflow and copying a bit of Python of how to read in the file. You're not going to restrict people from going to their neighbor and asking, yeah, how do I do this sort of like modulo statement for the pairing term, et cetera? How do we incorporate then the supreme power, the everybody's best friend, ChatGPT, Claude in this case, into this? So we don't really have too much time, but if there are any really strong feelings about this sort of use, we can bring it up. But there are, at the end of this, we're going to have a very open-ended place where you can type in whatever you feel, and we will collect all of these things. So,
so I suggest we move to the final part, and then we open that. So reserve your questions and comments on files. This is an extra case study that we're not going to read, but it's available on the slides. Take a look. It's about writing. So going forward, what we see.
Oh, sorry. So there's no answer. The point is, please think critically about your use. I'm concerned that even that is not an obvious point of discussion at some point. So please think critically about your use. And you should know there are guidelines already and standards. And if you're working in this building, you actually have an obligation to know what those are. You can disagree with them, but they're there, so you got to follow them. Okay. In terms of research groups, have an ongoing, active, open, honest conversation. So I did an informal poll of the faculty. Less than half of the faculty members had actually had this conversation with their research groups. Okay, so maybe that should change. My default for everything is disclose, disclose, disclose. This is sort of akin to the conflict of, we have to do a conflict of interest thing every year when you submit a grant. And there's always questions about disclosing financial relationships you might have. And the general guidance is just disclose everything so that there's no question and there's no gray area. So I would say that. And then there's some information here about what I recommended to my research group, but this is still an ongoing discussion for my research group.
Thank you. And you have this nice thing.
Oh, yeah. This is like my favorite quote about generative AI. This is a writer. You should go buy her book. She's an independent author. I hope she doesn't use ChatGPT. She says, you know, the biggest problem with pushing all things AI is wrong direction. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so I can do art and writing, and not for AI to do my art and writing so I can do my laundry and dishes. The thing I hear from people is, it saves me so much time. Well, what are you saving that time? Writing and thinking and coding, that is your job. But you should have the last word.
Wow. Okay, so now we're going to have an open discussion time, and let me, one second, let me make sure that this is open. Okay, so in this QR code, you can scan it and you can input more thoughts that will be anonymous. And you can even do that after the discussion if you have saved it. And we're going to have the link for the forum in the slides, and we can continue. So for the next 7 minutes that we have, I suggest that we continue with comments, discussions, and I hope that today at 12 is not the last time that the lab is going to talk about.
And I think one, if you want to prompt for what to talk about, if you've considered guidelines within your own group or what the boundaries of those guidelines should be, we'd be very curious to have that aired out here.
Thank you.
Suppose you, so one of the big problems we have here is accountability and responsibility of who exactly is coming up with these answers, right? And who's responsible for them. If you in the group create your own AI to do some very specific task, and then you train it on data and you disclose all that, does that get rid of that issue?
Essentially, but I don't want that responsibility. So
I wouldn't create my own AI in the group just because, you know, I'm never going to rely on it.
Right. I've seen things where like people will make AIs like identify when some kind of certain scattering happens in the data they come back.
Yeah.
Your opinion is the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, and we should be clear, you know, this discussion, we've been focusing so much on generative AI, but AI is used across the board. In the case of like particle classification and all of this stuff, it does fail sometimes, but it's a little different for generative AI. If you're passing things off as your own, that's one of the big issues. Right. So that's why disclosure is, I think, one of the biggest points that we're making.
Okay. Are you?
I think Aaron was through.
I guess I just wanted to give my kind of personal perspective on the software part. So like, I come from an experimental group, and I can say, in my opinion, the one of the largest problems with experimental groups' custom software that they write is essentially that there's no real version control or management implemented at any level, and that often, not always, but that there are pieces of code that are basically floating around that nobody really understands how they work or what they do, or the person that wrote them is 10 years gone. And like, I'm afraid that the idea basically of having ChatGPT provide even small segments is that if these things get built into larger things which are shared, I mean, you're essentially exacerbating a problem that already exists. You're not fixing it. And then on the other side, I think there's kind of a couple general principles that usually like design is more important than syntax, and that readability is most important, possibly above anything else, aside from the code performing correctly. And so like, it's not clear to me that even an approach on the small scale like allows the person kind of receiving the results to understand them. I mean, even in the kind of trivial case of your homework, the only way that you knew it was doing something wrong was because you knew where to look and what to recognize was incorrect. And like, I guess the key difference from my point of view with the Stack Overflow or asking a person is that you are at least in principle getting close to the author. There is a person somewhere who wrote it and understands what it does. And like, I think getting away from that kind of paradigm, you can get into a bad situation where like a person's using a piece of software that they don't even understand the first thing about.
I think an argument you often hear, with, against the use of AI is that like you wouldn't want people to have to memorize times tables because we have calculators now. We have this tool. But I think my response to that, I guess, is that a calculator is something you go to with an answer or a question that has a right or a wrong answer. And I think it's our responsibility when we have questions that have more nuanced answers is to be more nuanced in the use of tools that we use to approach those problems, whether that's generative AI or whatever else you do, or just talking to a friend. You have to have nuance in how you synthesize that new information, and you can't just leave, critical thinking and reading comprehension by the wayside.
Yeah.
Thank you for the athletics. So I know you said that the ethical side was a little bit out of the scope of this talk, but out of curiosity, given that the cat is out of the box here, maybe short of total nuclear destruction, do you think it's possible to maybe curtail the unethical uses of generative AI with, institutional, corporate, or national policy? Are there like more things we can do beyond just disclose?
Oh, well, that's a hard question to answer. So let's just maybe take a step back and think more abstractly about, what are our responsibilities as scientists? And there's like, there's a platonic ideal for what a scientist is and how they operate, and we have sort of vague ideas of what that is. But then there are professional guidelines that are determined and published in places. Those don't exist yet for this, but the general principles are there. Okay, and so I'm not actually very much of a enforcement type person. I think you have to understand you got to use critical thinking, and you have to adhere to what it means to be a scientist and the research that you produce and how do you make it reproducible and how you can trace the ideas back and credits given where it's due. Those are general principles. You have to do that all the time anyway. This is just another thing. And my main complaint is when I talk to the students, I see them as thinking very uncritically about this. It's just like Googling stuff. It's not a big deal. I'm very much, they see me as sort of this crazy crank neo-Luddite who's complaining about people on their lawn. I am that, but also I have a point, okay? Which is you gotta think critically about this. And the conversation needs to be had is, how do we think critically about it? What the standards are, I actually have no idea. But I do think that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And so if you disclose everything, you've kind of done your job in my view, because then if somebody asked you, well, where did that come from? How did you do that? And you said, well, here's my ChatGPT transcript. You're telling people you used it and they can see how you used it. At minimum, sort of your job is done. Maybe there's more nuance than that, but yeah, so Artemis.
Just one more point to that. So a lot of the ethical questions right now are turning into legal questions regarding the copyright and all of this. So there's the ethics of training and how you inform these things. There's no answer for that. I bet you there are going to be policies though. I just don't know when and don't know if they're going to look.
No, I know that there are tons of questions and many comments, so I would encourage you to please use the open chat and discuss more about it. We are running out of time. I guess many people have some other appointments or want to run off for lunchtime. But yeah, thank you very much for this very great discussion. I hope it continues further in the setup chat box, or what is it like? Yeah, website, yes, and the forum. So please be active there in discussing. And yeah, thank you very much for attending in such high numbers. Thank you.